Take it away, George.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining this month's Warning Letter Wednesday. This time around for Warning Letter Wednesday, we're changing up, going from a topic to a Q&A forum. Prior to the Q&A forum, we're happy to recap on a couple interesting news items as well as our Warning Letter of the month. So that's how we are styling this month's Warning Letter Wednesday. Some things we are happy to talk about and invite people to talk about are anywhere from FDA enforcement trends, patterns in regulatory data, or any industry questions. I'm happy to introduce myself as George Kwiecinski. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Key Solutions. We're also joined by Daniel Barreto, the founder and CEO of PharmQ Consulting, as well as Dan, if you'd like to add.
Well, I guess the thing that I can say, I'm a former FDA investigator. I worked for the FDA for about 19 and a half years. And after I left the agency, I joined a number of pharmaceutical companies where I was vice president of quality and compliance and did a lot of work in terms of enforcement activities. And now, as you have indicated, I run my own consulting company and I'm also an advisor to GKS. So I tend to represent the voice of the customer, meaning the industry within this forum, so that whatever we do with KeyPedia and GKS sort of matches the expectations the industry has for this type of product and platform that we have.
Yeah, super. Thank you so much, Dan. Um, some notes as well. We asked KeyPedia to introduce itself. KeyPedia is Global Key Solutions AI-based product. It interprets and analyzes regulatory data like FDA warning letters. So we've had KeyPedia introduce itself as just that. That's how it answered, as well as we sort of dive in here to the Q&A. Uh, we'll recap on the warning letter of the month. We have at Wikipedia to think about its selection of this month's warning letter based on drug-related and GXP data. It chose Healwell Homeo Private Limited, an Indian-based firm with pretty much what I might describe as significant, or as the FDA has also described as significant CGMP violations. They're listed here. And then we can also see the date of inspection and issuance of the doc, as well as the publication this month, and some of the related CFR codes and individuals. One other thing to sort of warm up as we go into a Q&A style conversation, I'm happy to sort of report on a couple of remarks from the University of Georgia College of Pharmacy's CGMP conference. This was their 50th annual GMP conference. And the beauty of this conference specifically is because it's run as a nonprofit conference. There was significant FDA as well as ex-regulator presence. So we got the chance to hear directly from those in the room at the agency on what programs and what sort of happenings we should pay attention to here in industry. So just to sort of recap on what some of those happenings are, Peter Baker on day one gave an excellent session, particularly on data governance and lean theory. I would just say, like in his fashion, he got the whiteboard out and truly drew, sketched, schemaed some of the most important thoughts around these topics. One thing I thought was extremely meaningful was his comments around quality culture. Quality culture is a term we have in industry that was brought about through research, and it's now basically been sunset through research. The reason why is because it may not always be a great way to think about quality. Simply defining quality metrics and KPIs to hit them can actually lead to a worse off overall environment. So these were some of the things he actually talked about. So I think that it's really worth mentioning those things. And this is some of the other comments around quality culture. The pivot to quality management maturity and lean theory is what he focused on. He actually went pretty deep on sort of the history, I would say, going into sort of the Toyota production system and some of the original designs of that, as well as he talked about, but was sort of kind of ran over and was sunset around the DOM framework, the idea of design, operation, monitoring, and then incorporating recent PICS guidance, which I believe he mentioned was introduced in the 2010s. So it has been around for a little while as as this shift happens. But I thought this was a very meaningful way to sort of recap some of these things. To recap days 2 and 3, we got to hear from those at the FDA, OPQ, and on the last day, Commissioner Robert Califf came in and spoke as well. They did not touch on generics or generic. I'm sorry, he did not touch on generics or generic manufacturing, which he even pointed out to the moderator. He was surprised it did not come up, which again just relates back to our warning letter of the month being similar to that. But what I would note is he definitely focused on, what some of the largest impacts are the FDA and sort of the broader characteristics. So he gave a pretty broad topic approach. But what I did find really interesting was he felt confident in the drug and device segments of FDA and what's going on around some of the programs there. And what he most commented on was actually tobacco and food, which I found interesting. As commissioner, he's of course experiencing a much former commissioner, sorry, he's experienced a much wider breadth of industry than we in the room have in terms of our focus on drugs, devices, biologics. But I thought overall that's a little bit of a recap on he spoke about it. And then he also did bring up the reorganization, uh, both historically from district offices to, sort of from the field offices and district offices to what it is now, as well as the more recent shift to the OII. It was back in 2024, I believe. So did give some comments on that as well. So all of these are also available on the website. We have entire written articles on these, as well as a recent research publication on foreign-based inspections in the Journal of Pharmaceutical Innovation. So I'm happy to have sort of given this recap. If there's questions about these events or these topics, I'm happy to answer now because we'll dive right into the Q&A. There's also more answers available on KeyPedia Lite. This is our platform available today on our site. And yeah, from there, Dan, I think we'll dive into the open forum and thank you.
Absolutely, George. I think that the opportunity that is being brought by today's session, it's really to entice now for um, the network that we have every time we have these seminars to actually become the active participants into the process. So I wanted to basically touch on a couple of things that I think that will be of interest in 2026 and beyond. For instance, you know that as of February, the QMSR has become an effective process. It's an enforcement tool that the FDA has adopted. And I think it's taking a lot of people by surprise in terms of some of the implications that are behind, the things that FDA could do moving forward. Whether FDA will be actively doing a lot of this stuff, it's yet to be seen the extent to which they want to do that. But for instance, during the previous seminar that we had, We talked about now the availability of internal audit reports and management review committee meeting minutes to be exposed for scrutiny by an FDA investigator, which, when it happens, this would require the industry to have a strategy around how they're going to deal with that. So changes are coming, and I'm interested to see what's going to happen within the next few months, or maybe by the end of the year, in terms of warning letters that we could see on KeyPedia with respect to this topic. And I'm going to be interested and I'm going to be watchful about that. Uh, I'm also interested, George, in terms of what's going to be FDA's enforcement in 2026 and through 2028, because FDA is actually changing its approach in terms of how it enforces. Recently saw that a number of warning letters have been issued lately, like there was a certain increase on them. But the question that I think it's important to have is, to what extent the approach that the FDA is using with warning letters is making a difference for the industry. Are companies actually taking warning letters seriously? And by the way, is FDA taking warning letters and warning letter responses seriously? And is FDA willing to actually seek a higher level of enforcement through this process? I'm doubtful, but I want to be wrong. But if you all recall, warning letters came after the agency had used the previous approach to letters that were sent to the industry. So by creating the warning letter process, the FDA thought that this would actually bring higher level of compliance. And that does not seem to be working. So it's going to be interesting to see if actually the FDA stays with the warning letter process, sorry, or if the FDA comes with something new. I don't know. And then, of course, when you think about AI as a tool or replacement for personnel, uh, I'm sure that more and more organizations are using AI as a tool. And the FDA is also coming with some direction in terms of how AI is going to be used. I don't think that the FDA has given us a complete set of guidance and perspectives with respect to how AI is going to be used. So I think this is work in progress. And it's going to be interesting again to see by the end of the year the extent to which uh, the agency is going to move in this area. One concern of mine with respect to the industry right now, it's the fact that both at the FDA level and also at the industry level, a lot of the institutional knowledge has been lost due to people retiring from different organizations, and those who did not retire moving into consulting companies or doing something else. So there is a brand new generation of people within the industry with the responsibility to make very important decisions. And I don't want to say that they're not experienced, but I want to say that the experience is being developed as they go. So they are learning how to make the tough decisions. And in that process, I'm sure that good decisions will be made and bad decisions will be made. So the question is, how long is it going to take before this new generation of industry leaders becomes fully mature to do the work that is expected? And on top of that, this new generation is expected to actually deal with incredible new technologies, and the new technologies bring new problems and new challenges, which have to be learned fairly quickly, not only by the industry but also by the FDA. So So somebody really has to, take charge and really become as capable and powerful as they need to be. And then lastly, um, the issue about the pressure of cost and cost reduction. And you might say, what does that have to do with GMPs? And I want to say a lot, because in industry, usually the quality organizations that get is the one that gets the most pressure to actually contribute with cost reduction. Internal audit programs get affected by that. The ability of the quality organization to actually do its job. And of course, cost reduction, it happens at very different levels. The purchase of new equipment is delayed. The improvement of or facilities and equipment is also delayed. Sometimes even maintenance programs are modified and revised to address the cost issue. So the question is, how does cost and cost reduction um, uh, will have an impact on a lot of these, the ability of companies to do compliance the way it's expected. So these are six bullet points that I wanted to sort of start with in terms of the conversation we could have. So
Yeah,
I don't know. I think there are some questions, George.
Dan, yeah, I think we'll have Zach start with the questions, but I actually just want to even recap on a couple of your points. All
Okay,
right.
great. Go ahead.
Because you started off with, trends and the quality unit. And I want to note that, actually touched on at UGA by an investigator was the fact that, you know, um, 21 CFR 211.22 and those subsections are quality unit responsibilities and regulation. Those are some of the most cited predicate rules. And right from this investigator, she did note that this is likely to stay status quo as it has been. So even as we think about trends, hearing it from the agency is interesting and important. You noted also, Dan, and this was a huge topic at this conference, the FDA, uh, how are they using AI tools? What are they looking for? What is their understanding and sophistication? You know, that, as you know, Dan, they're looking for trends in their investigation, right? They're looking for, everyone knows they're on site. So sometimes they'll stand and watch a process all the way through, so that people do drop their guard. So that was mentioned, and I believe it was I put it in the day two remarks on some of the examples of observations this investigator has found and how they found them.
I think your point
You
about I think your point about the citations for 211.22 is right on target, because
yeah,
the quality organization is the, as far as I'm concerned, the conscience of the organization. So as the power of the organization, quality organization goes, it's the behavior of the rest of the organization will go. So when there are
yeah,
issues cited in production or in validation or in maintenance, the FDA investigators will also always try to target or make the link. Where is it that the quality organization could have, should have, and done something to actually tackle this problem?
yeah.
And that's why the citations come up.
Yeah, and actually one and that segments well. You mentioned AI as tools and replacements. Even remarks around those questions at UGA were around AI, what AI tools are being used, how is it being used? That is one thing at GKS we're focused on is understanding which tools the agency is using, how and why. Some of this can be understood, but oftentimes that's really why. I guess one really well put way I will say this is it came directly from a speaker was you know if you don't understand your trends and the agency does, then that's a problem for you, right? So you want to stay as ahead of the curve as them in terms of being able to understand the data and trends you're looking at, no matter the tools you're using. So interesting to think about there. But those were all the kind of remarks I had, I
One
think.
thing, yeah, but one thing that's really important about AI is I'm sure that what the agency will say, and it will that stance will not change, is that AI is a tool, but it's not a decision-making tool. In other words, it doesn't make the decisions. AI is a tool, and the individuals within the quality or production or whomever uses the AI as a tool, in the end, the responsibility for the decision that is being made is not an AI decision. It's a company decision, and the company used the tool to make its decision. So you cannot blame AI for a mistake that you made. You can only blame yourself, and that's very important because future FDA citations will not say, your AI tool is wrong. It's going to say you're wrong by using a tool that may have been wrong, but that's a different set of discussions.
Yeah, super.
So, were there any questions, George? I think there was one question or two in
Yeah,
the chat.
actually it looks,
There is a
yep,
question in the
yep.
chat. So this question is essentially saying it's a long question, so
Okay, go ahead.
bear with me. I wonder where the QMSR is concerned, as the 14th Amendment grants certain rights to corporations as individuals. The Fifth Amendment protects the individual from self-incrimination. Thus, do we see a possible future of pharmaceuticals challenging the agency using their own internal audit findings against them? Also, while the intent of this approach is likely for greater transparency, do we worry that companies will begin sanitizing their internal audit records to manipulate the story as not to impose such liability, which would defeat the purpose?
That's a very interesting question, and of course, I don't think any of us around here is a lawyer, so it's
I
an
was gonna say
interesting
that.
it's an interesting legal question. Um, but as a layman, I could probably see the point of the question because remember historically what the FDA said was that it would not look at internal audits or any internal documentation because it wanted to give the industry the ability to sort its internal issues with confidence without fear for those activities to actually be picked up and used against the companies, during an inspection. So that change, to me is concerning, and because it really takes away the ability of companies to do self-regulation. Number one, it also takes away the ability for companies to be as precise and self confessing as they could be, because now that document is going to be scrutinized and interpreted, right, by an FDA inspector, and that gives a weapon to the inspector. But more than that, if those internal audits are now made public, because of 483 mentions them, I can also see the potential liability for a company to be actually, accused by clients or groups, interest groups, you know, because now there's more evidence against the company. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see what happens. That's why I told you I'm going to be paying attention. Um, but I'm concerned, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm happy to add, Dan, because I have a sort of blended response, less even QSMR focused and more just FDA and agency reflected focus. Because one thing that was brought up actually on stage at UGA by a lawyer was, because the FDA knows that most documentation of theirs can be FOIA requested, some conversations may be better had in person. With that said, uh, what was quite literally brought up after this was now with AI tools and transcription features, that, auto go into emails, auto go into notes, auto go into transcripts. Be very careful with online meetings and the forums you have like that, because as soon as it becomes written content, right, at least for the agency, this becomes something requestable. And they now have to maintain architecture and documentation around it. So interesting to put it from that perspective. Short note on that.
And I think your point is well taken. This is why during the last presentation I made about QMSR, I talked about the role of the legal department of each company in terms of addressing these potential issues and topics. Because now we're going from 21 CFR 211 to a little bit more of a more challenging territory where some legal implications could be made. And to me, I'm encouraging the industry to actually have these discussions before it's too late, right? And maybe that way we can sort of influence, the regulators to actually allow the industry to continue to pursue self-regulation without fear for reprisals or added liability that actually is not good for the industry, is not good for the patient, is not good for the FDA, it's not good for anybody. Any other questions, Seth?
Yeah, one question. And when inspectors cite data integrity related findings, and assuming they do not cite guidances, ISP, GMP, PIC, etc., what actually CFR regulations do they most often cite in the 483s, i.e. the SNAP, especially with regards to data integrity in technology such as systems and softwares and etc.?
That's a good question. I don't have the specific 21 CFR now, but obviously there's a section that talks about, documentation activities. And I want to say, I don't remember now, it's 211.16. I can't recite it. But obviously there's a rule that everything has to be documented. There is guidance about the ALCOA, where the FDA does expect, the information and documentation that you generate to be contemporaneous, to be factual, to be accurate, right? So those are going to be the guidance of documents that FDA will cite. But the bottom line of this is that there is a saying that goes extremely well. If it's not documented, it's a rumor, right? So that's a very important principle. And the second principle is if it's documented incorrectly, then you have not provided the accurate description of the history of an activity. So that document is unacceptable. So everything that we do within our regulated environment, pretty much everything, it's going to be documented, because if it's not documented, it just didn't happen as far as the agency is concerned. Now, when we document it, we have to make sure that documentation is accurate and correct.
Yeah, I'm actually happy to add. I asked KeyPedia this
Okay,
question,
go
and
ahead. Great. That's
uh,
exactly how we
yep,
should use it.
complaint files for devices is 21 CFR 820 198A. Design validate. It seems to have pulled all of 820. 192, 211, 192 is production record review. I know
That's
for a
it.
fact that's
192.
always a top 10. Always
Correct.
a top 10. Automatic, mechanical, or electronic equipment for drugs is 21168 Bravo. 190, 211, 194 Alpha is laboratory records for drugs. Is
That's right.
also a frequented one. So just from the sort of predicate rule approach.
Yeah, that helps because when we're trying to search your database, it's like trying to actually find that they don't often use the word Alcoa or data integrity in a
That
40.
is true.
Yeah,
It's like trying to narrow
exactly.
it down to provide the evidence to the business that this isn't a suggestion. This is the findings that, because people will tell people, oh, there's been a 68% increase in findings for DI. while other findings are going down. But then they're like, well, show them to us. And it's like trying to sift that through the mountain of 483s to get to specific examples. It's like we got to create like a search term that can get us the examples.
Yeah, and I think, Gerald, to your point, the term that was used a long time before data integrity was used was the term documentation practices. And what's happened is that we have, by mistake, I want to say, try to equate good documentation practices to data integrity. And the truth is that when people make mistakes that are legitimate mistakes because they left a date here or they didn't put the initial there or whatever, for me, that's not a data integrity issue. To me, that's a documentation practice issue. Now, especially if it's incidental, if it's part of the culture of an organization, then those documentation practices become a data integrity issue because now you've got a systemic problem. But in reality, the original concept of data integrity was when companies consciously would change data, would alter data, would erase data, delete data to fulfill a specific purpose. So I think it's important really to make a distinction between a documentation practice issue versus a data integrity issue. Because data integrity, it has a more, I want to say, criminal aspect to it, because it's more like fraud related, while a legitimate documentation practice issue, if it's incidental, I would not equate that to a data integrity issue. Good question, Gerald.
And as a follow on to that question, just as a quick, this is more your recommendation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guidance. I mean, I'm reading thousands of pages. PICS, the new Annex 22. Technically, the annexes are considered guidance from the EU.
Right.
Got the FDA guidance on technology, CSA, all this. When we try and illustrate to like, what's your recommendation when trying to illustrate to a stakeholder the expectation and the pushback is guidance isn't the law. Show me where it says we have to do it in the law. Like, what's a good comeback for that?
The comeback that I always say is not all industry practices are outlined or specifically cited in the regulation, but good manufacturing practice is a term that means that things that companies do because they are the right thing to do, they're actually part of the expectations that are set by the regulators. So for instance, if there's a new pattern of companies going from, let's say, conventional aseptic processing to a more complex processing activity, and then all of a sudden conventional becomes obsolete because the practice across the industry is better than conventional, then the good manufacturing practice is what the industry does in general and not what one or two companies do, right? So you cannot expect that everything will be cited in the regulation, but a best practice is exactly something that is recognized to be the right thing to do for every company that is within that regulated environment. So people need to understand current, this little c, means that you're actually getting into currency, into what's done today. That was the purpose for that c. And it may be a small c, but it's a very important c. You're muted, Gerald, just in case.
I was just doing a thumbs up. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it.
I'll back off my questions to give other people a chance so we don't run out of time.
Yeah, Gerald, if this is Ligia, if I can add something from auditor training, I want to say KeyPedia answered this well, George, and then provided additional support. Now, from the external auditor training, the same, we're supposed to audit data integrity, but then we don't have the CFR to cite. So what we are trained to do if we are auditing software in the laboratory, we're going to cite a laboratory record like the way Dan mentioned. So 21 CFR Part 211 194. However, most of the software is also in production. So in that case, very specific, depends on the type of non-compliance. We're going to be cite automatic, mechanical, electronic equipment. So that would be 21168, and then AB. So there's some availability for the auditor to write this utilizing the CFRs. And of course, overall written procedure and deviation, that's part 211-100 can be cited overall. So yeah, thank you for answering this well, then, George and KeyPedia.
And one thing that's also important, a lot of the data that is generated within the industry, it's going to be submitted to the FDA as part of regulatory submission. So the government expects you to provide them precise and accurate data. In 1989, we had the generic drug scandal. For those of you who are young, maybe you want to take a look at it. But I was the first FDA investigator who actually did the first investigation into the generic drug scandal. And the issue was at the time that Company X, and I won't mention them, they don't exist anymore anyways, had filed batch records, a series of batch records that had been falsified. And I was asked to actually go to that site and to perform not just a GMP inspection, but a criminal investigation, right? And that actually started the whole process. So a lot of people went to jail. A lot of companies had to close. A lot of products were removed. So I think, Gerald, you probably remember that. And you know, it can get to that level of seriousness. I just hope that we don't have another generic drug scandal issue ever again. In companies who are, you know, trying to do the right thing, they should learn from history. Unfortunately, our industry very seldom learns from industry. It's a cycle that tends to repeat itself. I just hope it doesn't happen, but it's bound to do. Any other questions, Seth?
No, not right now. But
Okay.
if anyone would like a question, please feel free to put it in the chat.
Let me go over. You know, why can't we avoid 483s? And you know, why? What are the reasons why, you know, pharma still fails? And the truth is that 483s, warning letters continue to happen, and if you read pretty much every one of them, the same issues keep popping over and over and over again. Poor investigations, you know, inability to do complaint management activities, OOSs, right? Poor validation activities. The same old issues keep coming over and over again. And I think that the reason why this happens is because, again, companies don't learn from history, number one. Companies go through significant shifts where, you know, there's a turnover of personnel. There's incredible pressure for companies to bring new products to the market. So they actually try to reduce the time that it takes them to go from development to commercialization. So there is a tendency to get into a much higher level of risk. And the truth is also that companies have internal audit programs that doesn't seem to work. Because when you think about it, why is it that you have an FDA investigator coming to your site and then finding issues that you should have uncovered yourself? Don't you have an internal audit program in place? Sometimes a local internal audit program. Other times that internal audit program is supplemented by a corporate internal audit program. So there is a problem with self-regulation. There is a problem with ownership. There's a problem with accountability. There's a problem with actually implementing good process improvement activities. There's a problem with just fulfilling commitments. So long as, and goes back to what you were saying, George, about quality culture. And the same is going to be with quality maturity, right? It seems like companies actually get to a level where they seem to have matured because they got a warning letter and now they have a response. And then for a few months, they actually fulfill that expectation. I call that rehabilitation. It's not really transformation. They get rehabilitated, and then before you know it, the old habits come back, and then they relapse. So our industry is into rehabilitation and relapse, rehabilitation and relapse. We need to change that. I don't know what the answer is on how we can accomplish that. What I think it all comes down to, the senior management of every organization actually taking a much better view as what it means to be part of regulated and a regulated environment. I don't know, George, you have a comment?
Oh,
You're
sorry, I
muted.
was muted. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. I think actually this is something that reminds me a bit of my notes on Peter Baker's talk on 3 days ago or last week at UGA. And day one was, what is the frameworks and systems we're using in order to facilitate these activities, right? So again, that's where he sort of really advocated for a bit of a sunset on the term, at least, of, that quality culture, because what does that really even mean, right? And why is it valuable? Not. And then thinking about, one example he gave was, if you're measuring a KPI based on the amount of, I think it was kappas opened or something like this, then, people have different motivations if they're being measured for something, right? And in quality, you have to be very careful with how you do that. But that's all my comments on that.
No, I totally agree with what you just said. And again, but this is why I still have a certain hope before I fully retire from this environment, which is to see tools like KeyPedia actually being used correctly and being used to actually fulfill some of those pressures that actually industry personnel are facing. When you think about KeyPedia, the data is there. We've got all the warning letters that you can think of. We've got all the 483s. We've got all the guidance documents, all of them in one platform. You can ask KeyPedia almost every question you could ask, and you're going to get an answer, a response that will help you. I've tried, for instance, simulating that I received a 483 about specific issue. Let's say that I was not performing adequate investigations on a timely basis, and I asked KeyPedia, can you tell me how do I respond to this 483? And I got a pretty comprehensive, well thought out response from KeyPedia. And then I would just download it, and then I would look at it and say, okay, how do I maybe tweak it here and there if it's not in my mind as a consultant fully complete? And I do that. And I tell you, there is hope for this industry if we then learn how to use the tools that are at our disposal. 20 years ago, we didn't have anything like KeyPedia. We had to think it all through. We had to go to the paperwork guidance document, and we had to go from one guidance document to another guidance document, and then put all of these things together. And for me to actually put a 483 response as a consultant, it would take me 2 or 3 hours to actually do all the research. It takes 2 or 3 seconds now to do it. So there is hope. And George, to me, this is really part of the message that we have to deliver for the industry. It's not all lost. There is opportunity for this industry to become better.
Then I have a quick question, and I hope easy. So you almost answered this question. A lot of people work both internal and external auditors, external for supplier auditors. What can we do better those days to actually avoid warning letters, to help to prepare? So what internal auditors can do better, right? And the same for the external. Use KeyPedia, I'm guessing.
In part, you never ask easy questions, Ligia. So sorry, I'm going to have to answer it. I think if companies treated GMP audits like, if companies treated financial audits like they treat GMP audits, I think companies would have significant financial issues. So the first thing that has to be done, it's really to look at GMP internal audits for the true purpose that and the true objective that could be obtained from them. The vision for a strong internal audit program has to be there. So there is a process. So it all starts with, why are we doing internal audits this year? Who are we going to be auditing? What function? What is it that we want to audit from that function, so that the outcome of that audit is actually going to produce a strong corrective action, a true verification that that function is actually compliant with regulations, or can we just do an audit that will help the company to engage in continuous process improvement? So I think that today's internal audit programs at 99% of the company is really about a check mark process. Okay, how many audits do we want to do this year? 10. Okay, where are those audits? Oh, you know what? We haven't audited ABC Pharmaceuticals in 3 years. Let's do that. But without really thinking, okay, do we need to go to ABC? Let's look at the history of ABC's performance over the last 3 years. Oh, they've been doing well. So what is it that we need to do there? Or they've been doing wrong. So let's now find the right auditor who can go out there. Let's have the right audit plan. Let's make sure that we've developed a report that is going to be read by the senior management of that company, and it's going to give them an opportunity for them to say, we got to fix this. But audits, I mean, for the most part, audit reports are not read by anybody, unless at 1% level, it's a true audit report that makes a significant difference. That's my perspective.
Yeah, thank you. That is a really good point. So quite often the audit schedule is in the SOP, so quality people should question this, should bring this to management review and redesign, like you said, to make sure the gap analysis perform, and also we do the historical performance.
I can tell you, for me, most internal audits are inefficient and expensive because they don't actually generate the result that they should. And I think that the industry has to rethink the approach it takes to implementing internal audits. It's a waste of time, a waste of effort, and somebody has to take the bull by the horns in this case.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you. Let's do it. Yes.
Any other questions so far, or you want to close now, George? Because we are about 7 minutes away.
There is one question in the chat, which George might have kind of answered it. But essentially, well, I know we have a few more minutes. This will be the last question. It says, with the new generation of industry leaders in the past 2 years, does KeyPedia show different trends in citations, observations, than the numbers of them? Are any particular patterns that are different than prior than 2024, or is the data rather unchanged? I think that's a good George question.
Yeah, I would be super happy to comment. Thanks, Zeph, for bringing that one up. I missed it. I was responding. A couple of comments. In terms of a new generation of industry leaders, I think there's always that. In the past 2 years around having tools to assess trends, citations, observations, that is the case. That is what KeyPedia does, right? All the way from predicate rules to the hundreds of thousands of ways different observations have been written and paginated. And then for macro trends, uh, it would take longer than 5 minutes, but what I would note is our most recent page on the media page is a research paper in the Journal of Pharmaceutical Innovation specifically on trends from 2014 to 2024, which of course encompasses COVID and encompasses large changes in our drug supply chain and how that is sourced here in the US, as well as sort of where those things are coming. So I would note that paper sort of breaks down the dependence and resiliency of inspection data both in the US and abroad in countries such as China, India, and in Europe. So there are certainly ways to comment on that as well. I think I'll stop there.
I think that's an interesting question, but I think there are also some factors that will influence the expectation for an answer with respect to how the new generation of leaders influences more or less warning letters. And I think it's because, without getting into politics, I mean, we are under a different administration, that at the federal government, there's been a lot of changes. So for me, I perceive that the focus right now is not so much on warning letters by the government as it is in terms of redesigning the way the government approaches the function and the role of the FDA. So I think that's just some factors are influencing that response.
I'm going to stop recording now.